What's up, everybody? This video is finally happening. Just want to give a big shout out to all my fellow members, mods, and especially my admin team for putting up with me over the last few weeks on trying to get this video made. This video was supposed to be released a week and a half ago, but my schedule just didn't allow it. So it's finally happening. Today will be the first of two parts. Today will be more so based on what everybody's been saying. But it's based on my opinion, of course. So take that into account. This is my opinion on various things that we're all discussing. It's been mainly the main topic of discussion when it's come down to the Turing RTX consumer cards. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this ball rolling, because I need to get this video finished so I could get some sleep, because tomorrow's video is going to be a lot more complicated, and it's going to be basically discussing architectural changes within Turing that will have an effect on rasterization, and quite honestly, it's going to have an effect on a lot of things, not just gaming. But there was one key figure, one variable that Nvidia mentioned, the CEO mentioned. He had it on the big screen behind him. That being 16 INT 32 plus 16 FP 32, which means 16 integer 32 bit cores plus 16 floating point 32-bit cores. Now, that's something that I really have not seen discussed by anybody. I've seen it mentioned by some of, in my opinion, the more respectable tech outlets, tech journalists. My favorite being Anantech. Loved that page, still love that page. Of course, Anand is no longer there. He went out to go work for Apple. But it's, in my opinion, my go-to when it comes down to hardware reviews. So when the RTX finally drops, that will be the first place I go to read their review on it. Now, this release is anything but conventional, which is why I'm making this video. For those of you who don't know me, consider this on YouTube, and I'm not a YouTuber. I'm an admin for Computer Enthusiast Master Race, better known as, or more commonly known as, CMR. So CMR for the win, boys. All you guys from CMR, I know you guys are watching this. You guys are going to be the first to watch this, because it's going to be unlisted for probably around a 24-hour window before I make the video public. So a big shout out to all you guys. Thanks for all the support over the years. We are doing our best. I'm doing my best to keep things going in a positive direction. But I needed to put my 2 cents in on this video. So this particular video is my 2 cents. Tomorrow's video is based off of the underlying architecture and the changes that will need to be made and that are made in Turing, and how they could potentially increase gaming performance as far as rasterization goes in certain games. I don't see this model showing massive gains in every game. It's definitely going to play a larger role in more modern day game engines, especially DirectX 12 API supported games. So that will be discussed tomorrow, and that's a far more technical discussion. And if I were to make that video, incorporated it and incorporated this video into it, this video would be very, very long, and I would not even sit through that. So yeah, I'm just gonna get right into it. I made a nice little list of the topics I want to make sure to discuss. Well, let's start with the Nvidia presentation that happened on August 20th. which is now 3 weeks or so. Yeah, about 3 weeks back. In my opinion, it was a very fun and entertaining presentation to watch. I enjoyed watching it. But like everybody, I was very taken back by the fact that they simply didn't mention gaming performance, standard mainstream gaming performance as we know today. Rasterization performance. No mention. Not a single mention. They could have showed, at least a few bar graphs in comparison to how it performs versus the 1080 Ti or even the Titan XP, or just some kind of metric so we could base the rasterization performance. But it never happened. Everything was about ray tracing and DLSS. Tensor cores, ray tracing cores. That was the big sell. And I understand that that's a big sell and they needed to push hard for it. But I can't excuse them for not mentioning something that everyone expected. And they knew damn well that everyone expected this. And they still neglected to do it. So, yeah, I could empathize with everybody out there that's pissed off. You have every right to be. And it is Nvidia's fault. And keep in mind, I'm not a gamer. I haven't gamed in years. But I do still try games. So, I'll talk about that later. So, yeah, my opinion, the presentation was a flop. And it came back to bite them in the ass. And consumer perception. Once again, you guys have every right to be pissed. And the information coming out, it's just all over the place. I've heard some reputable YouTube, supposedly reputable. I don't really get my tech news from YouTubers, tech YouTubers. Recently I started watching Gamers Nexus, and I do like their format. I like their topics of discussion. I like their testing methodologies. And that's I can't say anything bad about Gamers Nexus, but I've seen some Linus Tech Tip videos and some other ones, and I can't watch those videos. I learn nothing from them. I take nothing away with me, having watched their videos. So I'm not big on YouTube. So making this video is a pretty big deal to me. So by the end of it, let me know what you guys think about my video, because this is just being thrown together at the last minute. Let's move on. I'm going to skip ray tracing for a second. I want to jump into DLSS, deep learning super sampling. Now, I'm going to start with the biggest counter argument for the implementation of DLSS, especially the 4K crowd, saying that at 4K you don't need any sort of anti-aliasing. I disagree. But then again, I'm not a gamer. But when I do play games, ever since I was a little kid, 92, 93, up until today, the one thing I've always wanted was for my games to be as graphically beautiful as they possibly could be. So that meant all settings up. And that still remains true to me today, even in 4K. I will not play a game in 4K if I can't use a form of anti-aliasing. So I always max it out. Of course, it takes a huge hit on hardware, so I understand why you would say, I don't need, MSAA at 8x at 4K. Maybe you don't, because it's going to take such a performance hit. But if you had it on, you're going to see a difference. Unless you have really bad eyes. You will see a difference. But DLSS, I mean, just super sampling. And I've always been a big fan of super sampling used as anti-aliasing. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, essentially it takes your current rendered image, upscales it to a much higher resolution, takes all those details from that higher resolution, scales it back down and fills them in to your native resolution. And it really is the best looking form of anti-aliasing. The problem is, traditionally, super sampling type anti-aliasings are probably the most taxing on your GPU. So you'll see massive frame drops comparatively to things like MSAA, which is probably the most commonly used form of anti-aliasing. And for Nvidia to incorporate or implement their tensor cores into Turing, to me, it's genius. I mean, now we have a very, very, if not just beautiful form of anti-aliasing, but an efficient form of anti-aliasing. It takes, I mean, I'm not going to say that it takes that it doesn't rely on the core architecture. Okay, it still has to run through the pipeline. The threads that are being fed to actually run this form of super sampling need to go through the warp scheduler, go through the dispatch port, go through the operand, make its way to operand crossbar, make its way to the tensor core for it to actually work. So yes, it does have some overhead, but comparatively to every other form of anti-aliasing, it's extremely minimal. And same will go so for ray tracing. I mean, it still has to get its instructions from somewhere. So yes, there is a little bit of overhead, but just taking the brunt of the overhead from your SMs and the actual cores in charge of computation and rendering your shaders, your pixels, and everything else, taking that overhead off of all that and putting it onto the tensor cores, in my opinion, is genius. And I have no doubt that that will be widely adopted considerably sooner than ray tracing, of course. So I'm a big fan of that. I'd call it innovative. It's an innovative concept. It's the first to be done, as far as I know. I'm not just referring to tensor cores, but I'm just saying to actually have a hardware accelerated anti-aliasing in any form. I don't recall there ever being such a thing. If there is, I'm sorry. Please correct me, because if there was at some point, I'm actually curious to know. So I think that's a brilliant implementation into this new graphics architecture, and I'm sold on it. I do like it. Now, moving on to ray tracing. By far the most controversial thing in this entire release. I personally love the idea of ray tracing. I've loved ray tracing ever since I learned about it. I first heard about ray tracing maybe like 15 years ago. I'm a big movie fanatic, and ray tracing, as I understood it, made no sense in gaming. It just didn't seem possible with, what I knew as far as GPU architecture and where we were at the time. It just seemed so far out before we would ever see ray tracing implemented into video games, especially in real time. So when Nvidia decided to take this on, and I truly believe it probably took them a good 10 years in research and development to pull this off. I'm going to put it out there. This is the most innovative thing we've seen in a graphic architecture since I'm not going to say the coup de core, like the CEO said. Um, in my opinion, this is the most innovative thing we've seen in modern day GPU architecture, only compared to the rasterization engine. Like, there really hasn't been anything in between as innovative on any scale. There have been some pretty clever implementations in gaming. Some worked, some were complete flops, some were controversial, like Hairworks, and there was that other one. Don't remember what it is. GameWorks, I hear a lot of people talk about that. I don't even know what GameWorks is, to be honest. Once again, not a gamer. But there's no denying that having hardware accelerated, dedicated ray tracing cores to actually create real-time ray tracing in games, to me it's the coolest thing ever. I mean, like, I started gaming in the early 1990s, and I've seen the progression, and looking at modern day video games and looking back, maybe over the last 4 or 5 years, there have been subtle changes, but the graphic fidelity in these games haven't really gotten any better. They've gotten clearer, but they don't look any better to me. And at some point, and I can't put a date on it, the focus straight away from advancing graphic fidelity and just improving image quality and just textures, this and that, just making games look more beautiful, people started caring more about high refresh rates and high frames per second. And I mean, I understand it. I've tried it. It's awesome, especially for first-person shooters. It makes sense. But outside of first-person shooters, real-time strategy, RPGs, many other games, you don't really need that high refresh rate or even that high resolution, in my opinion. But that's the thing, like, we're so dead set on just following that path that it makes sense that people could give two craps about ray tracing, because this first implementation of ray tracing, you're not going to be playing it at 4K, and you sure as hell aren't going to be playing it at 4K 60 frames per second. But it's a start. And quite frankly, I think it was perfect timing on Nvidia's part. This isn't something that they just decided, okay, it's time. This was very much planned for several reasons. Going back to, well, it was about 10 years ago now. Yeah, 2008. This was the release of Nvidia's Tesla architecture, GT200 or GTX 200 series. Back then, and prior generations to it, all relied off what's known as SIMT, which stands for Single Instruction Multiple Thread. And I'll explain this in tomorrow's video. And then when they moved in, can't forget to say this, back then, most of the pipeline was hardware based. Over the years, they started implementing more software based implementations that allowed game devs to actually work with and use to their advantage during game development, but the pipeline was very much fixed. It was very much hardware based. But with the move from SIMT, single instruction multiple thread, to SIMD, single instruction multiple data, which came with Fermi, we also saw the first fully implemented logical pipeline, meaning everything within the architecture can be programmed for. The pipeline in the GPU itself, in Nvidia's GPUs, the programming comes from driver APIs. And then third-party APIs kind of work together in tandem to create the best performance they can. And obviously it relies heavily on NVIDIA's part in implementing the drivers properly and optimizing them. And that's been pretty much the theme for the last several generations, over 8 or 9 years now. And it still exists. Pascal was still SIMD. Now, Turing will not be SIMD, just because of that one variable on that screen that they didn't discuss at all. The plus 16 integer 32 plus 16 floating point 32. Just with those numbers on the screen, I immediately knew they have to switch over to SIMT again. The problem with SIMT, as we come to know it, going back to the Tesla architecture, it was starting to reach like certain limits, particularly with memory. Like it was saturating the memory. It wasn't efficient, to be honest. Raw throughput trumped SIMD. Even programming specifically for SIMT, for fully parallel programming, is considerably easier than programming for SIMD. But the model just wouldn't work with their current architecture. So we've grown accustomed to, every GPU manufacturer, AMD and Nvidia, all of two, relying off this SIMD model, single instruction, multiple data. When Turing, of course, is going back to SIMT for the first time since Tesla. But it's not the same SIMT. And you got to remember, this was 10 years ago. They're not just going to bring back a 10-year-old concept and implement it into a new graphic card. The thing is, we've seen it before, recently. Not in a consumer card. I wouldn't even call it a prosumer card. It's more of a highly parallel compute card. The Titan V. It implemented the same exact 16 integer 32 plus 16 floating point 32 cores. And once again, this is something I'm going to go over in great detail and great depth in tomorrow's video. I just need to rest a little bit because my mind's a little foggy. And yeah, there will be an increase in performance. So the metrics in comparing, previous GPU releases through Nvidia, for instance, taking clock speeds and floating point 32 throughput, and then doing the math and trying to deduce within a margin of error the percentage of gain between one generation to another, cannot be applied to Turing. It can't be. So all those people out there that are trying to use this mathematic formula are coming up with these insanely low numbers. I personally don't believe that's true at all. Those numbers don't add up. And once again, that's something I'm going to discuss tomorrow. So yeah, the business model. Now, first, I started this whole video off by saying that I was pissed with Nvidia when I saw the presentation, and I still am. But originally I wasn't just pissed with the fact that they didn't show any gaming performance. Not that it even really applies to me, but I understood that that's kind of the way things worked. But when they announced the price of the cards, $1,200 for Founders Edition 2080 Ti, and it was $700 or so for the Founders Edition for a standard 2080. I'm not really sure where the 27 fell in price point. I generally ignore the XX70 series, but that's a considerable markup over previous generations. And $500 markup just from the 1080 Ti founders to the 2080 Ti founders. That's a lot. That's a big pill to swallow. But I didn't mention the price earlier because, over the last few weeks, stepping away from this and just doing research, figuring things out, trying to see it from everybody's perspective, from the consumer to, even the AIB partners and to Nvidia as a business. The timing to release this couldn't have been better. Like, this is the perfect time to release this, and I will tell you why. First off, we had the Titan V and, of course, the V100, the Volta architecture, which was released a little over a year ago. And, of course, it was ridiculously high priced. It was out of the range of an average consumer. It was never considered a gaming card, even though it's supported by Nvidia 3D game-ready drivers. You can't say so much for prosumer cards. They don't work. And it did perform quite decently. Even before making this video, I went back and I checked Hard OCP, who had the most recent benchmark results for a whole group of games, comparing a Titan V to the 1080 Ti. And on average, I think it was like somewhere between 30 to 45% improvement in frames per second for the Titan V over the 1080 Ti. That always seemed very low to me, especially given its CUDA core count, HBM2, and all this technology and all this raw throughput. Something's been holding it back. Now in comes Turing. Smaller cut down die. I'm not talking about the die itself. Look, the architect, the rasterization portion of the architecture, very much cut down from Titan V. Yet we're seeing information showing certain games performing 50-60% better comparatively to the 1080 Ti. And it makes sense. And I'm going to explain that once again tomorrow in a more technical conversation, but in great depth. Now you got to keep in mind both of these GPUs, the Titan V first, and now the Turing cards, are based off of a 12 nanometer FinFET N node. N stands for Nvidia. Okay. TSMC worked with Nvidia to make this custom node for them, but it's not really 12 nanometers. It's 16 nanometer with some efficiency improvements. I believe it has like 1.3% better density or higher density as far as transistors go, which isn't indicative of a leap from 16 nanometers to 12 nanometers in any way. But it showed like a 50% improvement in efficiency. So this is kind of like a stopgap. And it's perfect timing for this very reason. The next architectures from both AMD and Nvidia are undoubtedly going to be based off of TSMC's 7 nanometer FinFET, true 7 nanometer, and that's a big jump. So essentially we're going from 16 nanometer to 7, just like we went from 28 with Maxwell to 16 with Pascal. That's a huge jump. And the reason I say it's good timing and perfect timing with Volta and now Turing is to get this into consumers' hands, get it more importantly so into developers' hands, so they could at least get the ball rolling, start implementing this new technology, particularly ray tracing. That's going to be a tough one to implement. And you got to take many factors into account. For one, it's an entirely new hardware. It's not just some new change in architecture in the rasterization engine. It's an entirely new architecture in itself implemented into this architecture. It's a new core design. It's a new processor within a processor. And, they came up with these metrics, 10 gigarrays, 8 gigarrays, I don't know, 6 gigarrays. I don't even know if one of the factors was 6 gigarrays. It's a laughable metric. It sounds ridiculous, but it will be a measurable metric. We don't know how to measure it yet. And I highly doubt that game devs have any clue how to measure it yet. I mean, this is still brand new to them. They're working with brand new APIs developed for ray tracing to leverage the ray tracing cores. And I mean, that's not going to be easy, especially coming in, halfway through game development. I mean, these are unfinished games, and now they're baking it in on top of an unfinished game. You're bound to have problems. But it will be figured out, and it will make it easier for them. So for now, there's kind of a learning curve. So I'm going to give them the benefit of doubt. I'm going to let them take their time, get things nailed down right, and hopefully by 7 nanometer GPUs, which I don't doubt, there will be far more gigaray throughput. Like I said, I can't measure gigaray throughput. I don't know what 10 gigarrays actually means. I can't apply it into anything. So, I mean, the timing just kind of works. And they really didn't have a choice. It was either now or never. If they tried doing it with a 7 nanometer die, it probably wouldn't have played out as well. Getting into the game before that jump and that die shrink makes complete sense to me. But the price, $1,200. And keep in mind, I'm only thinking about the 2080 Ti because I'll be picking up two 2080 Tis. I'm waiting for a particular AIB model. For those of you who know me, know exactly which one I'm talking about. But before I start doing all the crazy stuff that I do with GPUs and start taking them apart, mounting pots on them, and start getting them really, really cold and frosty, I'm definitely going to hook those things up, overclock them on air. Or maybe I'll put them on water. I don't know. I'll probably do air because I probably won't keep them in their stock form for too long. I'm going to play every ray tracing game that's on the market because I just love graphical fidelity, and I love seeing this type of innovation and pushing forward the way we see games today. And I just can't wait to see it implemented in RPGs, especially in VR and VR RPGs. How crazy would that be? I mean, it's going to create immersion like we've never seen before. And if it wasn't for Nvidia taking this on, we might very well have needed to wait 10 years before we've seen this. So I got to give them props. But still, the price. Is it worth that $500 markup? Despite the architectural changes, which I'll talk about tomorrow. And the tensor cores, the implementation of that, yeah, that took a lot of money to implement that initially. And now the brand new ray tracing cores. And then this massive die size. I don't have it written down, and I've had so many numbers running through my head. It's about 754 millimeters squared. That is huge. For a consumer die on a GPU, that is a massive GPU. So the production, the manufacturing, I mean, I can't say anything about yields. I never looked into the yields. I don't even know if they released the details of what kind of yields they're getting with these dies. good or bad, it's not cheap to produce these dies. It wasn't cheap to for all the research and development that went on over the past decade. And there are several other things that have been under R&D over the last decade that are being implemented into Turing. So, taking all that into account, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to price them that way. From a consumer standpoint, I'm not going to tell you to buy it. I'm not going to tell you not to buy it. It's up to you guys. I mean, I'm not going to try to sell these GPUs to you. I'm just trying to explain the GPUs. And that'll come tomorrow, of course. But yeah, that's what I have, guys. That's just my opinion on those particular topics. I haven't spoken about them since the release. Well, I didn't even speak about them during the release or the presentation. I just didn't really have anything to talk about. I wasn't just going to sit there and bitch about it or be a fanboy and just blindly support them. I wanted to take some time, research all these things, and take various other factors into account, and then see how I truly feel about them. And that's all the things I mentioned is truly how I feel. I'm not telling you guys that you have to agree with it. If you disagree with it, I'm totally fine with that. You don't have to. But yeah, tomorrow I will be shooting the architectural video. And for those of you who know, I just developed a block diagram of TU102 SM. And I'm going to be using it to explain the architectural changes within Turing that are similar to Volta and considerably different from GPUs over the last several generations that we've come to know and love. And we will see some performance jumps in traditional rasterization that no one's really talked about. Like, the topic has never been brought up, and that kind of bothered me. So I'm sorry it took so long to make even this video, but I promise you I will get that video done tomorrow. I'll be well rested and hopefully more articulate. And yeah, I mean, if you guys enjoyed this video, that's great. If you didn't, really don't care. This is just an opinion video. So, as always, CMR for the win. I look forward to making tomorrow's video, which I'm going to take far more seriously. And hopefully that opens up a topic of discussion. That one I'm looking forward to making more so than this one. This one is just my opinion on RTX and Turing, seeing that I haven't spoken about it. Even in CMR, I've been mute when it came down to that topic. I just ignored it. So you guys now know how I feel about those particular things. So I'm not saying think that way. Don't take my opinion into account when you factor in your decision whether to buy or not to buy the new RTX cards. I don't want you guys to do that, so please don't. Make up your own mind. Is it worth it to you? For any of those technologies, do they justify the price? And before making that decision, wait for the benchmarks. You really cannot not wait for the benchmarks, especially if you guys are the type that want high refresh rates at high resolutions. I do believe it'll be possible to play 4K 100 plus hertz games and AAA titles. You're not going to do it with one card. You may be able to do it with two 2080 ties. Yeah, tomorrow's video is going to be a lot different than this one, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm exhausted. I'm going to sleep. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. CMR for the win. Peace.